Hey, it's RC Gray from Survivor School. Did you know that trauma is not just a mental health problem? It's a whole life problem. It doesn't just impact your mind. It takes a toll on your body, your finances, your relationships, and your ability to grow. Survivor School provides you with the trauma-informed tools to help you regain control of your whole life and take control of your future today. Because healing is a journey of 1,000 destinations. Join Survivor School. We'll lead the way.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SASS Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. This podcast serves a dual purpose. First, providing a safe space for victims and survivors of rape or sexual assault to share their experiences and facilitate healing. Second, it educates professionals across various fields on the principles of trauma-informed care, going beyond superficial understanding to foster effective advocacy. Through powerful storytelling and expert insights, each episode delves into the complexities of trauma and the profound impact rape and sexual assault has on the brain and body. Survivors share their journeys, offering listeners a deeper understanding of the healing process, while also shedding light on the importance of empathy and support in these sensitive situations. For professionals, this podcast goes beyond theoretical knowledge, providing practical guidance on how to approach, engage, and support victims and survivors in a way that minimizes re-traumatization. It emphasizes the importance of a trauma-informed approach in fostering trust, ensuring safety, and empowering survivors on their path to recovery. This is episode 130, which is part one of a multi-episode series. My guest this week is Rachel Izzo. She's here because she reached out to me through LinkedIn and shared with me her compelling and fascinating story of multiple sexual assaults and rapes, but from a perspective that is particularly important from a law enforcement lens. I don't want to lessen the impact of this beginning episode of Rachel's story by telling you any more of Rachel's experience. I'm going to let her do that, and I'll catch you on the other side. Here's Rachel. Rachel Izzo is my guest today. Thank you for joining me. We've been trying to get this going for a few weeks now, so it's an honor and a thrill to have you actually be here on the show with me.
Thank you so much for doing what you do. And I reached out to you because I was telling my friends in my survivors group that I found the perfect person that I've been trying to dream up to help our cause. You're the perfect person that I was looking for someone on our side. So it's really an honor that you're doing this with me. And I really appreciate it. I've been wanting to do something like this for a really long time. So,
well, thank you. This is an honor. Thanks for saying all those nice things. Rachel found me on LinkedIn and she reached out to me through LinkedIn direct message and had a compelling story. That's why she's here. There's a backstory to the fact that, yes, Rachel is a survivor of a rape and a sexual assault on multiple occasions. I'm going to let her tell you all about that. But when we talked, she also told me about a backstory. I'm going to let her introduce that aspect of this too. But first, Rachel, if you could tell my audience about yourself.
Yeah. My name is Rachel Izzo. Everyone calls me Rizzo. I'm used to people calling me Rizzo.
I like that, yeah.
If someone says Rachel, I feel like I'm in trouble. It's like when your parents just say you by your full name.
Yeah.
I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 9 years, which is crazy. Most of my career was in the ER, so I've seen a lot. Did the whole ER thing during COVID. During my time as an ER nurse, I also became a forensic nurse, and I worked as a forensic nurse for 2 years in Oregon, which was always my dream. After what I'd been through, I really wanted to do that. I then switched pathways and kind of specialties, and I do a specialized thing called PICC lines vascular access now, which I absolutely love. And I'll get into this, but kind of the fight or flight of the ER was a little bit too much for my body, and I miss it sometimes. I really miss the forensic nursing. I haven't been able to do that since I moved. I'm no longer in Oregon. I try to make at least part of my career path aiming towards advocacy in some way, forensic nursing being the way that I was able to get into that. Been doing the nursing thing for 9 years next month, actually. Pretty crazy.
That's quite the career already. Tell us how you got into nursing. What was the driving force to get you into that?
When I was a senior in high school, my mom's a nurse, backstory, my mom's a nurse. I was a weird kid at 5 years old. I was always watching like Discovery Health Channel, like live brain surgery. I was a weird child in a great way. I would say so.
Yeah,
my parents
absolutely.
Might say
That's interesting. Yeah.
So I was always drawn to medicine, just fascinated with the body and anatomy. And my mom had anatomy coloring books when I was a kid. So instead of drawing in unicorns and stuff, I was drawing in anatomy, nursing school coloring books. So when I was in college, and I'll kind of get to this, is all part of my story, I had some health issues, and then I ended up majoring in exercise science. I was an athlete as well. So I was in exercise science. I loved it. And the major was so fun. But I realized my senior year that I was like, there's not much that I could do with a bachelor's degree in exercise science unless I wanted to be a personal trainer. And I didn't feel called to do that full time, or I needed a master's. Nursing is one of the only healthcare fields where you basically have to know you want to be a nurse at like 16, which is crazy if you think about it. There's a lot of emerging second bachelor's degree programs in nursing. So when I was a freshman, maybe sophomore, somewhere middle of college, I was like, I think I'm going to try to do the second degree bachelor's. So you get a bachelor's degree, and then it's an accelerated nursing program, assuming you have, having to prove you have a bachelor's already, going into just nursing classes, and then you get your BSN. So I decided to do that. Definitely like my senior year, I want to go that route. I thought having a bachelor's degree in exercise science thought it would do something for me. And then I was like, it really didn't really do anything. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to go right into nursing school. And then the trauma happened, and it changed my path a little bit. I really wanted to be an ER nurse. So my senior year of high school, we had a career day that usually was just something silly that the freshmen do. But as a senior, you have the option to do a career, like an actual shadowing day.
Right. Most
of my senior students, I went to an all-girls Catholic private school, very rigorous. They wanted the day off, so they shadowed their parents at home so they could just chill. I instead got in touch, somehow a connection with the head trauma surgeon at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, which is one of the biggest level 1 trauma centers in the Pacific Northwest. And I got to go shadow an ER resident for an evening for like 4 or 6 hours. It was like 7 to midnight or something. I just turned 18, so it brought me there, and I was in scrubs. Everyone thought I was a med student or a nursing student, and I hung out with this resident who would just drop me off in a trauma room and watch what was going on. They don't really do stuff like that anymore. Lots of liability stuff, but I was just this kid in scrubs, and they would just drop me there. I'd see all these things, and there was a couple traumas that came in, and I was just hooked. I was like, trauma, physical trauma, like a motorcycle accident came in. And I knew that I belonged when the resident said to me, "Oh, we have a motorcycle crash coming in. That should be really cool." And you have to be kind of fucked up in the head to think that.
Yeah, right.
But that's the mentality of an ER provider. So I was like, I'm in. I had already been accepted to college that didn't have a nursing program. And that's where the idea came, like, okay, maybe I'll either transfer or do a second degree bachelor's program in nursing. But I knew that moment that I wanted to be an ER nurse. Eventually did that, and then got kind of tired of it. But that was the moment I was like, I need to be in an ER someday.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome. Yeah. What a great backstory. I love that. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah. It's a fun story. And I haven't talked to the trauma surgeon in a while, but occasionally I would reach out to him and just update him about my career. Like, hey, I'm an ER nurse now. And it's kind of cool because that was 17 years ago, 2008. So 17 years ago. So it's kind of cool to be like, yeah, I finally did it, and got tired of it. But, I did it, and I got to say I was ER nurse and did all the crazy travel stuff. Got some amazing stories, met some cool people. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't think there's an easy way to transition from that into this. You alluded to the fact that there was a bump in the road, a big bump, a major change in your life, and it impacted you on a huge level.
Yeah.
Rachel, what are you able to tell us about your rape?
So I want to preface this with, I would assume, and I've heard this on your podcast, many people who come on here have had more than one assault. I read a statistic once that if you're sexually assaulted once, you're 2 to 4 times more likely to be assaulted again.
Right.
I could go on a tangent as to why I think that is. That's maybe a story for another day. So I will preface it with that I had other things happen to me before what I call the bad one. And I also want to say that there is no one person's assault that's worse than another. Like, they're all trauma.
Yep.
And I'm saying this out loud to remind myself that we can't trauma compare. It's not fair to anybody. I even do that to myself, but in my head, I even label that was the good rape, which is so fucked up if you think about it. But I want to preface this with that Growing up in an all-girls high school, it was hard to understand boundaries and learn proper boundaries with men because I didn't have any exposure. There's a point to the story, so I'm going to get to it. But I moved back to Seattle after living in Massachusetts for 9 years, spent my childhood in public school. Boom, go back. I'm in all-girls Catholic private school. I was a very straight-laced kid. I did athletics. I was one of the literally OG CrossFitters. 2004, I started. CrossFit was not a thing. Everyone knows CrossFit now. But I was in a gym. I was 14. I was in a gym with people in their late 30s, early 40s. So it was me as a kid with all these older people working out every day. I loved it. That was my world. But I didn't have a lot of exposure to learning boundary setting. And we actually had a police officer come to our school once to try to, social media was just emerging, like MySpace was a thing. So they were doing a talk about safety in terms of what you should put out to the world, and had an interesting story with that. But it was very much an emerging thing. I don't think anyone has MySpace. I don't know if it still exists. Didn't have a lot of education with that. And I was in a very sheltered world in my gym. It was like I went to school and I went to the gym. And when I was 17, we had an incident at the gym that was like a sexual harassment thing. And I went to the owners. I told them what happened. They kicked the guy out. It was handled beautifully. And I was like, oh, okay. So I learned, unfortunately along the way, women, as you're growing up, we have these experiences. I kind of didn't have a lot of experience with guys or boundary setting, but, had that experience, and it filed in my memory of like, okay, this is how you should handle if, a young female athlete approaches you, says, I'm uncomfortable. They handled it beautifully. Boom, done. Leading up to I call this kind of the fork in the road for me. This is what changed the course of my life forever. I had a coach that later on touched me sexually, and he kind of preyed on me for 2 years. Technically, I was an adult. I was 18, but I was still in high school. And let's face it, you're not an adult at 18. Like, maybe legally you're an adult, but that not transition from high schooler to like adults, it's not that easy. And what I say is that this wasn't, quote, that bad, put that in quotes, because in terms of the actual event, it wasn't as bad as what happened later, but it literally taught me how to be groomed, and it taught me the freeze response. And that's really important later on. And I want to say how important it is to recognize these experiences as majorly traumatic, because it sets your body and your nervous system up later for other things to happen. I was talking to a friend a couple weeks ago, because this long story, I ended up reporting this coach to Safe Sport a couple years ago, and he was actually disciplined, which is crazy because it was the only form of justice I ever really saw in anything. So it came up very recently, which was kind of bizarre because it's been years, and it's been 4 years for the investigation. Like, I've had a lot happen the last couple of weeks between, the Women's March and all this stuff. So it's very oddly timed with everything that was going on in my life. But he essentially taught me to freeze. That was the experience with him, taught me that if I speak up, no one will believe me. If I speak up, I will not be taken seriously. If I speak up, I will have my dreams taken away from me. And that's what it taught my body. Because this person, I was a really good Olympic weightlifter. I was on the road to maybe going to the Olympics, not now, but back then when it wasn't a huge sport. My first or second competition, I qualified for every national meet as a junior and a senior weightlifter. I was a junior weightlifter. I was really good. And he had convinced me that if he didn't train me, no one would, that I wasn't good enough to go anywhere else, that he was the only one that could get me to where I wanted to go. If I missed a weight, he would literally turn his back on me. So my body was pushed to the extreme. I broke my wrist weightlifting because I did a weight that I wasn't comfortable with and I missed. I did that twice, once with him, once without, but my body was just pushed to the max. And then I had to let him touch me. And if I didn't, I tried to set a boundary once and it completely blew up my face. I was going through this report that I made. I had attached all these emails that I had completely forgotten about, sending emails to other women. I was the only girl at the gym at the time. There was another girl that this happened to before me and she left. So I was the youngest girl. There was 8 of us at this Olympic weightlifting gym, and I was the kid, the girl, and then there was all these adults. And I was going back through emails, begging one of the older women there, begging them to help stand up to this guy who was in his 40s being sexually inappropriate to an 18-year-old girl. And reading these emails as a now almost 35-year-old woman emailing someone who was like 35 at the time, I was horrified that no one stepped in. And I was so uncomfortable to show up that I asked my cousin once to come with me because I was so afraid to go to this gym because of how uncomfortable I felt. So this whole experience, there's a point to this, is that while it wasn't quote unquote that bad, what he did, it went on for 2 years, and then it primed me for the experiences later on. And I said to my ex-boyfriend, but he and I are friends, we were dating at the time, I said, he ruined my life. This man literally ruined my life. My body broke. So I know that now this is related to trauma. I developed really, really bad chronic physical pain that had no origin. It was like fibromyalgia. Yeah. Look at a lot of people with fibromyalgia, trauma, almost all of them have trauma. I had to heal myself essentially. So my life was ruined by this man. In 2009, that's when everything kind of hit the fan physically. And I didn't even recognize it as abusive until I was like 21, had a great therapist. And she was like, do you realize that this is abuse? I was 20. I was like, no, I didn't know that. But, looking back, I'm like, it was grooming, manipulative behavior. If I didn't do what he wanted, he would literally walk away from me. And I had been convinced that he was the only person that could help me get to where I wanted to go. So this went on for a couple of years, and it ruined my ability to, one, regulate my nervous system. And it really ruined my ability to say no and to set a boundary, especially with a man in authority over me, which is really important later on, because I look back at that initial experience when I was in high school, and the guy at the gym that was being inappropriate, I said something, they made him leave. It was handled very well. And then I look back at what happened, because I was just thinking about this the other day. I was like, wow, it really was that very slow manipulation over time, the grooming, the gift giving, treating me special, like all the things that are textbook predatory behavior, that the actual physical event, what he physically did to me wasn't that bad, quote, but again, it set me up for everything else that happened. So that's an important part of my story, because it took me a long time to understand that. As not that it's like, not where did I go wrong, but I would think to myself, I wasn't always like this with my boundaries. I'm like, what happened? And I remembered, I'm like, it was this is what trained my body to freeze.
Hey, it's RC Gray from Survivor School. Did you know that trauma is not just a mental health problem? It's a whole life problem. It doesn't just impact your mind. It takes a toll on your body, your finances, your relationships, and your ability to grow. Survivor School provides you with the trauma-informed tools to help you regain control of your whole life and take control of your future today. Because healing is a journey of 1,000 destinations. Join Survivor School. We'll lead the way.
And that's really important, because a lot of people don't understand the freeze responses part. We hear fight or flight, but then we don't hear a lot about freeze and fawn. That's a new one that I've learned too, fawning. But I froze. Like, that was my trained response. And I remember the actual moment when that happened with this coach, where I froze. And that was the moment that my nervous system said, okay, you're safe when you freeze. And then having to play this part of like, yeah, you can do whatever you want to me as long as you help me. And like telling myself that that's okay, because you're the only person that can get me to where I want to go. All of this was a learned, conditioned response over 2 years, in very formative years, that played into what happened later on.
And very common in the sense of what we were talking about earlier, that the neuroscience of trauma and what the brain does in those situations. And scientifically or neurobiologically, that freeze response is referred to as tonic immobility. Yeah, I think it's important. I'm glad you're articulating this, because I know there are so many listeners and people who will hear this that will go, oh, yeah, exactly. And you also referred to it as kind of a learned behavior. It's the way our brains react to protect ourselves. It's a protective response, but everybody responds differently. And there are varying degrees of tonic immobility or freezing. And it has to do with our sophistication level, our education level, our previous experiences to trauma, a whole gamut of things, what our personality is and what we really have experienced in terms of previous situations of stress, crisis, or trauma. All the chemicals that are released in stress and crisis are the same ones that are released in trauma. It's just in varying amounts, the cascade of hormones that get released. And I know this is, like you said, leading to more responses and incidences. I do want to say this. I am so sorry and empathically listening to what you have to say. Obviously, it shouldn't have happened. But the fact that it did, and that you are now to the point where you're willing and able to talk about it, I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for doing this and for being here. But just know I'm so terribly sorry that these things happened to you.
I really appreciate that. And I thank you for giving the platform. Again, it's not something that we see a lot of, especially in your position, which I will get to why that had been previously triggering for me talking to anyone related to law enforcement. So it's also a very healing experience for me because I am interfacing with law enforcement in a way that is not a horrible experience, which I will again get to. So I appreciate that you doing this, and you obviously really care about this cause, and that means a lot to people like me. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that and saying that. I appreciate those sentiments and those comments, because I do want people to know that that is where I'm coming from, a platform of empathy and of community and education. That's what this is about. And I'm so interested in making sure that law enforcement hears this too. And that's a huge part of my marketing, isn't just to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault, although that's the main aspect of this platform. But I so badly want law enforcement to learn what it means to be trauma informed, to learn the neuroscience of trauma and what the brain does in terms of memory and recall and all of these aspects that are so grossly overlooked and in fact are more harmful to victims than the actual rape or sex assault sometimes. And, I know you're going to, I know we're going to talk about that too. Yeah. So I didn't mean to interrupt. I know you were on a great flow.
I can ask any questions too, because there's a lot to my story. And again, I'm coming from a place also as a medical provider as well. So I feel like I know a little bit about some of this stuff as well, medically as well. So yeah, if you have any questions, especially as my forensic nurse days, the cause I'm passionate about, obviously. So yeah, please feel free to interject. I've done a lot of self-reflection. I found meditation. I did all, the stuff to heal myself essentially. So I feel like I have a good amount of insight, and I'm still learning about how this affects me. I just recently learned how it's affected my relationships in a new way, which was a complete shock to me, and can also get into that as well. But I'm still learning about myself essentially, and how all these experiences have impacted my life and, changed my life. It's part of my life. I won't say it's ruined my life, but at the time it did. But how trauma affects your whole life, and it's not does. You have no control of it. You can control how you heal it to some degree, but you can't control how your body responds to trauma. And I remember wishing what I do now, and I still do this sometimes, I still tend to freeze. I'm better at it. But if I have an experience where I froze, I then go back and I think about all the ways that I should have fought, or like I should have said this. And sometimes I actually do I don't say I fight, but I will blow up sometimes because I was so used to not speaking up that now there was a period of time where I would have like a heightened response to standing up for myself. So it's about finding that balance. I just say that no one's ever, I don't say ever healed. We're always working on something. There's a new layer, whether we're healing or leveling up, however you want to call it. Yeah. And again, I'm still learning. I have a great trauma therapist that I work with who, again, helped me find another layer that I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that was there. So, it's an ongoing process, but I think that's true for anything in life. So.
Absolutely. It's a new normalcy. There are people who absolutely get stuck in the trauma aspect of it and have a hard time moving on. And there are various reasons for that. And I feel for them, and I hope to help educate them also through this platform, because being stuck is not comfortable. I've been in that boat. I know what it feels like to be stuck and not be able to move, to be frozen for not just the immediacy of the trauma, but for weeks, months, and some people even years, and some people a lifetime.
And I know people like that. And I know when we were talking before, I connected with a friend. I'm not going to mention her because I want her to reach out if she decides to, but we were in Newsweek magazine together. Anyone searches my name, this magazine article will pop up. So it's not, on the DL. Everyone knows about it. If you want to look at it, just search my name. I mentioned in this article that was about us. I was immediately drawn to her because she wasn't living as a victim. I want to say that we are all in different spots of healing. Everyone's process is different. I do not judge someone at all if they are stuck in that living in their trauma. I get it. Like I've been there. I realized that I don't want that to be my life. Right. And I had to work really, really hard to not identify as I'm a survivor of sexual assault. Like, yes, I am proud of that. I am proud of what I've gone through and what I've been able to heal. But for a while, I had to completely remove that from my identity because it had become all consuming. And I am drawn to people that do the same thing because I'm, wow, you don't let this define you. Like, it's so easy to let and this is not maybe the best example, but even people who have cancer who are like, I'm a cancer survivor, which is amazing. You survived cancer. Yes. I'm at the point where I don't want to be identified by the worst thing that's happened to me in my life. Yeah. I went through that phase of when social media was coming out, in my Instagram bio, I'm a survivor, #survivor, that's great. That was a phase. But I realized I can't keep identifying, this can't be my whole identity, because it was, and I was stuck. It took a lot, again, meditation insight to realize that I need to completely disidentify from this, not blocking it out, not saying it didn't happen, but I need to stop identifying with it, or else I'm never going to move on. Right. And part of that was I had to leave New York, which I'll get to, but I was so stuck in my trauma based on where I lived. And then so many legal cases going on that once I got away physically from the environment, I was, you know what, I need to stop identifying with this. So I stopped saying I'm a survivor. At the time when I was trying to date, like, it was a big deal in terms of still very much fresh. So like I would tell people that if I was dating somebody, but like really soon, like it would like be the first thing that I would tell somebody, because I was proud. Like I was like, I went through this and I survived. But at some point it becomes too much of your identity. And I don't want this to define me the rest of my life.
I love that you say that way, that you don't want it to define you. There's so many other huge aspects of who you are and who all of us are, that I think that terminology and that articulation is critical. And I'm glad you said it. And I just want to emphasize that we don't have to make that who we are. We don't have to make that our identity. We don't have to let that define us, although there are some really good aspects to moving past your trauma and being a survivor and growing in that survival journey. But there's so many other aspects to our lives that are part of that survival journey that need to be focused on too.
Yeah. And again, I have no judgment. We all heal at different rates. I remember talking to some girls I was friends with at the time, which play into the story. And I say this carefully, but they were such victims, like completely identified. Their whole life was their trauma. And that's where some people just are, and that's okay. But I remember there were some women that I was friends with that, maybe the assault happened 20 years before, they still had flashbacks, and they would say, well, this is just my life, and kind of throw up their hands in like defeat. And I'm like, no, it doesn't have to be your life. And I worked really hard through my meditation practice and therapy just to be like, no, like this. Yeah, yes, it changed my life forever. Like it did alter the course of my life forever. And I have to accept that. I didn't get to go to the Olympics. I didn't get to become a TV writer, which is why I moved to New York, which I'll get to. And it did alter the course of my life. But that's not the first thing I tell people anymore. I mean, when it's in the news and stuff like that, that's a little different, like the last couple of weeks, but it's not the first thing I tell a guy when I'm dating them. If you have triggers, it's one thing, but we all have different triggers. I was lucky I didn't really have any in terms of being with a man. That didn't really trigger me too much. It was more law enforcement that triggered me. Obviously that's important to communicate, but it's not the first thing I tell somebody if I'm going out on a date. It doesn't have to be the spotlight of my life, right? Because there's so many other things. And in order for me to heal and get to the place where, I can't have a conversation like this, I needed to completely disidentify with that identity and that community of very unhealed people. Because I'll say, we're going to get to the law and order SVU stuff in a second. There is a community of survivors that are very unhealed and unwell. And I was a part of that. And I had to completely remove myself because I was ready to level up, be like, I'm not going to live like this anymore. And I had to just completely disidentify with it. And I channeled it into other things like becoming a forensic nurse, which had been a goal of mine for definitely since the assault itself. Even before that, wanting to do something that would help. And as a forensic nurse, a lot of the times I'm the first professional person that victim in that moment will see, even before law enforcement. And it's a very important role. So I took that very seriously. So instead of identifying as a survivor, which again, I say proudly, I channeled it into other ways. And I had to, I was healing myself, my body and my mind and my spirit along the way. Add that in too, just trying to channel that into other things of, yes, this happened to me, but I'm fucking doing something about it. And that was what I switched. And that's why my friend that was in this article with me, I really clicked with her because she was the same way. It's like, fuck this. No, this doesn't have to be our life. No, I'm not going to accept what the NYPD did to me. And I'm not going to stay quiet. I am not going to shut up until I see change. And if I don't, I'm going to fight this rest of my life. So I channeled that living in this victimhood to a fight in I would say a relatively healthy way, because I feel like I am at a point where I can do stuff like this and it's not going to ruin my day, or I'm not going to have emotional meltdown. And I am at the point where I'm also in a position, I'm a nurse, like I'm an ER nurse, I'm a forensic nurse. Like I can hopefully do some things that will help.
And I think that's an important part of that too. I'm going to interject this real quick. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but I want my audience to hear that this isn't just about Rachel and you trying to get justice for yourself or vengeance for yourself, or it is very focused on helping others. And you just said that, I want to help. And that, I think, speaks to my heart for where this platform is going, what you're doing here on this platform in terms of speaking that out. Absolutely. Yes.
I'm glad that you say that, because it really isn't about me anymore. I mean, it is, but it's not. Like, I'm not here because I want to just share my sob story. I'm here because I want to fucking do something. Yeah. It's not okay what happens. It's not okay that nothing's changed. The focus of where I'm going is what happened with law enforcement. The assault itself was a big deal and altered my life forever, but it's really what law enforcement did. That is the reason why I wanted to come on here and show that it has not changed. And I have fought for years to have change. And that is the problem. Unfortunately, I think we're always going to have rapists and bad people. Like it's just going to happen. Unfortunately, that's humanity. And that's not going to change in my lifetime, if ever. But the people that aren't supposed to hurt us, that are hurting us, which is law enforcement, and these people in authority that have power to over vulnerable survivors, vulnerable populations that are literally abusing survivors, that's not okay, and that has to change. So it's about me, but it's not. And after this happened, and when I was able to kind of process a little bit more, I can't just sit back and be quiet. I've never been able to do that. Like, even my parents will say I was always a loud one. I was doing theater. I was always on stage. I was always just being loud and speaking out, whether it was for a cause or just my personality. My healing journey has been, I need to do something and I want to change it. And that's been how I heal. And not everyone does that, and that's fine. But for me, I am here because I want to share my story to show that this is not just a one-off thing that's happening. Yep. This is a systemic issue that has not changed since everything happened to me 12 years ago. There was an article that came out recently about the law enforcement, NYPD, again, just treating rape victims like shit. It's still happening. It has not changed. So the purpose of me coming on here is, it's healing for me, of course, to share my story, especially with someone in law enforcement who is not like the other people. But it's really, I want to change things. I'm living in Washington, D.C. now. I'm in a great physical location to actually do something. Current administration is another story, but I'm living in a place, I'm in a time in my life where I'm really devoted to this cause and using my voice because I can speak about it. And I am healed enough where I can hopefully go out, if it came to it, on a public stage and be able to speak these things in an articulate way, in a way that will make people understand I'm not law enforcement. And having someone like you with this platform is so important because you are law enforcement, or you have the power to get law enforcement to listen in maybe a better way than someone like me. Like, law enforcement hates me. Not really, but the NYPD hates me. It's just how it is. If I walked into the NYPD today, was like, let's have a conversation about trauma-informed interviewing, not a single person would want to hear what I had to say because of what happened. But that's my purpose now, is I want to be on the forefront of getting things to change. And if it happens in my lifetime, that'd be awesome. If not, then I'll just keep doing what I can until I can't do it anymore, because if something bad happens to me, I want to fix the problem. If I have the ability to be able to do that, that's what I want to do. So that's why I'm here today. It's more than just me. It's about changing the system.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. Thank you for being here. You are doing exactly what my whole goal is, and that is to reform the rape culture that exists not only in our society, in some of the microcosms of that society. Law enforcement is a huge aspect of that. Mm-hmm. I want to normalize the conversation. We've got to talk about this. We've got to bring it out. We've got to shine a light on it, and we've got to change it. You're absolutely right. It has to get fixed.
Yeah, it needs to. We have a whole survivors group from New York that were wronged by the NYPD. And one of my friends there, her assault happened in 2010. There was another one that happened in 2018. And then there was an article that came out that I sent you recently about a survivor that was wronged by the NYPD this year. It hasn't changed. It's been 15 years, at least for some of us that have earlier assaults, that were wronged by the police. And part of my story was, and I'll get to this, that I filed the lawsuit against the NYPD. And the city let them off the hook because they were like, no, we're not responsible. It's just two rogue detectives. No, it is a systemic problem. And that's what makes me the most angry, is that the city got away. I mean, yeah, it would have been nice if I gotten a little bit of cash out of it, because it ruined my life. I mean, really ruined all of my 20s. Like, the trauma that I endured for a few years of my 20s, I would never want anyone to go through. I got nothing basically. And it was because the city said, no, we're hands off. It's these just two bad guys. I'm like, no, you've had a systemic problem for decades, so many years that has not changed. That's, again, why I'm here. I'm not here just for me. I'm here because I want to change things. And I'm hoping that maybe if I share this on this platform, maybe that'll happen working in tandem with you. Some way it'll get to the right ears. Again, being a forensic nurse, I like to think I have a little bit more credibility than I used to pre-forensic nursing. It's much more than just me.
It's shocking because there's this dichotomy in the general public's mind that, yeah, we know that exists. We know that it's there, but those are isolated incidents. And actually, the prevalence rate is huge. And that's what the public doesn't recognize, is how prevalent this is in law enforcement, in sports, in the medical field. And we can go into that extensively, I'm sure. I've got another guest I just interviewed yesterday who is experiencing some extraordinarily horrific trauma from the medical field. And so it's a huge problem.
Going to report your rape should not be another trauma that you file into your trauma cabinet. And that's the problem, is that experience is traumatic enough. When I put in order the severity of how I perceived my trauma, my experience with law enforcement is up there in the top 3. I'll get into the nitty gritty. So I had this experience with the coach. I went through a bad breakup when I was 20. And then after that, my physical symptoms, I had, again, a lot of physical pain. This is a whole other story that, again, I could have a whole podcast related to how I healed myself. But in 2011, I was really in the thick of a lot of health issues, physical pain. I lost the ability to work out for a year. I really had to heal myself. And I want to emphasize how terrible my physical symptoms were and where I am now. It's pretty incredible. But I was assaulted during this time frame. I also had a very short-lived abusive relationship where the guy stalked me for 2 years. And I don't want to minimize that stuff because that was very traumatic, but it's not the center of why I'm here. But I want to share that because I want people to know that if you did experience that, that is a big deal. Domestic violence, it's the stalking, that is a big deal. And the only reason it's not a bigger deal is because so much other shit happened to me. Like, I was thinking about this a couple weeks ago and I was like, oh God, like I forgot how horrible that was, you know, and not like living in it. It was a bad experience. And when you don't have any self-worth, you're more likely to let people in that you shouldn't let in. And that's been still a big part of my healing journey, which I'll get to how that manifested recently because it's about healing and relationships and stuff too. But I had this experience in 2011 that was just not great. I was actually sexually assaulted, quote unquote, date rape, you know, was at a bar, got drunk, guy took me back to his apartment, that sort of thing. Had a pretty bad experience with law enforcement at that time too. And this was in Oregon. So this is nothing, small town in Oregon, had nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about, but stands out because when the police showed up, they said to me, well, you don't seem like you were drunk enough to not be able to consent. And I was like, okay. So I never talked about it again. And what was really interesting is after that experience, my physical pain got so much worse. And that goes into how our body processes trauma and holds on to it, which is important just to understand. If you're dealing with trauma and you have physical symptoms, they are probably related. And it took me many years to realize that. Again, I don't want to minimize this experience because that is a big deal. And it's a big deal to anyone who goes through it. It leads up to the bigger thing for me. In 2010, I spent the summer in New York with my boyfriend at the time. I'm going to mention his name is Brian. We're still friends. I was spending the summer with him, and in 2010, we got to go on the set of Law & Order SVU. It was like a dream come true. I was a total SVU groupie. I don't really get starstruck anymore, but I couldn't believe my life at that point. I was on the set of the show, hanging out with Chris Maloney and Mariska Hargitay. It was like a dream come true. Brian's friend was the cameraman for the show. We found this out in a really great way. It's a great story. During that time, we connected with a bunch of the cast and crew. Even after Brian broke up with me in 2010, I maintained contact with a couple of the crew members. So one of these crew members was a writer. And my dream was to be in film somehow. I love acting, but everyone wants to act. So I wanted to write. I love writing. I'd always been told I was a good writer. I was like, I want to move back to New York and I want to be a nurse. But then on the side, if I'm living in New York, maybe I can write. Maybe I could do something with that because especially being in the medical profession, there's a lot that you can write about in TV. And I love to write. It's an outlet for me. It's fun. Used to be fun trying to get that back. But I loved writing. During this time frame, I reconnected with one of the writers for the show who does not work on the show anymore. And I want to put that out there. I'm not going to mention his name. I can't because this was not prosecuted. I was maintaining contact with him. And then the 2011 assault happened October 2011. And a month after that, I was in New York and I hung out with this writer and we were friends. We went to dinner, and that night, this is really important for later on, because in hindsight, a lot of times when we go through traumatic experiences, especially if it's with someone that we knew and trusted, there are things along the way that you think back like, oh, that was a red flag. And you file that away, but you want to trust this person, so you don't actually do anything about it. And this was the biggest red flag for me that stands out so clearly to me. I had told him about this assault that had happened, and we had gone to dinner, and we were friends. I was in his hotel room, and he was respectful. And I want to say, like, there was a time where he didn't assault me, and we were friends. I was talking about this assault that had happened in Oregon, and he said to me, well, what if that's just something bad that happened to you, but it's not fair to label that guy something so terrible, like a rapist? So he said this to me and was defending this guy that had violated me. And I remember in that moment thinking, he's done this before. I think he's a rapist. Like, I remember thinking that, and this was a year and change before he assaulted me. And I had a meltdown, like I broke down, and then he apologized and we never talked about it again. But I will never forget that moment of, he's done this before. Yeah, so that's important because I still kept contact with him. And again, this was a person that I really respected. I liked, like we were friends. We got along great. I always had fun. He was really funny, and he could help me get to where I wanted to go. So if, for the listeners, there's a pattern here. I'm in a position where there's a male authority figure over me who wants to, quote unquote, help me get to my dream. I'm starting to repeat a pattern here. And this is important because of what happens later. So I would come back and forth to New York to visit. I was seeing a physical therapist there who was helping me with my health issues. So I was there for a reason. And then I was in a situation with him in 2012 that wasn't like an assault, but it was pushing my boundaries. And I was like, you know what? I need to set a boundary here. Strictly professional friends, nothing more than that. I felt responsible for maybe blurring the lines a little bit, not intentionally, but again, I was so used to my boundaries being pushed by a male authority figure because then they'll help me and get me where I want to go, that I, quote unquote, had to be okay with it. My ex-boyfriend, Brian, again, we had been chatting, and I told him the situation I'd been in, and he was like, if you're ever in that situation, call me. I'll meet you there. I'll help you. I don't trust him. He said this to me. He's like, I do not trust him. I don't trust him alone with you, especially when there's alcohol involved. Please call me. I said, okay. So I had made this mental note to myself. If I get into this situation again, this is what I'm going to say. This is what I'm going to do. I don't want to be in sort of situation that he could take advantage of me or use me sexually in any way. That was like September 2012. January 2013, I just graduated college. I was back in New York. I visited family for the new year in Baltimore, which is kind of where I live now. And I went to New York. It was my favorite place to be. And I was about to move there because I wanted to be a writer. Went out to dinner with this person. And Brian was going back home. And I told him I was at dinner. And this is where I was at. Like, I didn't trust this man enough. I had to have a plan B, like a backup plan to exit the situation. Like, that's how much I didn't trust him. And that's important because I had to relearn to trust my own instincts and go with my gut feeling on things, which is very easy for women, especially, but any survivor who's been in trauma to like ignore. And that plays a part in my current relationship still. But I had a plan B to get out. That's how much I didn't trust this man. And I hadn't eaten all day. There was alcohol involved, but I somehow ended up back at his apartment. Someone had asked me if I was had been drugged. I don't think I was drugged. I was taking a medication at the time that interfered with alcohol. I don't remember everything, but I remember saying, I need to leave my clothes on, and pushing him off me and pushing his hands away. He took my clothes off. And I'm not going to go into the details of what happened, but it happened. It was a thing that happened, and he did not respect my boundaries, like I had said. And I froze. So I had this plan in my mind. If I got into this situation, I remember the room spinning. I felt so messed up from the alcohol, probably not eating. I don't think I was drugged, but it was a combination of things. And I remember feeling like the room was spinning, and like I was like, I just need some water, and then I need to go. I kept saying that I just need some water. I need to go. I said over and over. And then he kept trying to push it. And then I kept pushing him off me, pushing his hands away. I need to leave my clothes on. Didn't respect that. At the end, in my head, I was like, nope, this didn't just happen. So what we do to try to rationalize trauma. At this point, I was thinking, okay, if he is nice to me, then that wasn't what I think it was. That was my rationalization. So he kicked me out of his apartment. He did this to me, and it was like, okay, you have to leave.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SASS Podcast. But keep in mind, this was just part one of this multi-episode series of Rachel's story. Remember I said at the beginning of this episode that this was going to be a compelling series? I think now you have a pretty good idea of what I was talking about, and Rachel's experience just gets more and more gripping as you'll hear her explain what happened when law enforcement gets involved. Be sure to join me next week as this story continues. In the meantime, be sure to tell your family, friends, and acquaintances what a great podcast this is in bringing fascinating and educational stories that help us all heal from our traumatic experiences by understanding that it's time we started normalizing the conversation about rape and sexual assault to help bring justice to victims and survivors. Another great way to do this is to start by believing when you hear a victim or survivor tell their story, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. Thank you again for being here, and be sure to tune in next Tuesday for part 2 of Rachel Izzo's experiences, right here on Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SASS Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Hey, it's RC from Survivor School, and if you're feeling stuck in survival mode, overwhelmed and exhausted by a trauma cycle that seems to control every part of your life, we get it, and we're here to help. We know that healing doesn't happen 1 hour a week in a therapist's office. It happens every day in real time and real life. That's why we brought together over 20 trauma-informed specialists and experts who understand how trauma impacts your brain, your body, and your life. We've built a supportive community of other survivors who get you and who've always got your back. Look, healing is a journey of 1,000 destinations, and we believe that every milestone should be celebrated. We'll guide you on a journey that helps you turn down the trauma response and regain control of your health, your relationships, your finances, and help you build your dreams. So if you're ready to break free from survival mode and start living the life you deserve, join Survivor School today. We get you, and we've got you.